Every day, a scruffy stray dog makes its way through the quiet, early morning streets, stopping at a hidden sewer grate to drop carefully measured morsels of food. When a determined local reporter finally uncovers the heartbreaking truth behind this ritual, the revelation brings tears to the eyes of an entire community. What secret is this loyal canine trying to share? And how does one small act of kindness illuminate a story of forgotten hope in the midst of urban despair? Every day, as the early morning mist still clung to the quiet streets, a scruffy stray dog would make its way through rain-slicked alleys and over cracked sidewalks. Without fail, the determined canine would pause at a particular sewer grate hidden in a shadowed corner of the city. There, with a calm ritualism that defied the chaos of urban life, the dog would drop carefully chosen morsels of food into the dark opening below. No one could quite understand the significance of this daily act until one fateful day when the truth was finally uncovered. In the beginning, the sight of the dog's peculiar routine had sparked only curiosity among passers-by. Neighbors whispered theories. Perhaps the dog was feeding another stray, or maybe it was simply following an old habit born of hunger. But as days turned into weeks, and the ritual continued without interruption, local residents began to wonder if there was more to this story. The quiet persistence of the stray dog hinted at a secret purpose, a message encoded in each measured drop of food. Intrigued by the mystery, a compassionate local reporter decided to investigate. Venturing into the labyrinthine back streets and darkened alleys, she trailed the dog until she reached its daily destination. What she found on that damp, forgotten corner would soon touch the hearts of the entire community. Hidden below the sewer grate was not the expected congregation of fellow strays, but evidence of a life largely unseen, a homeless man, weakened by time and solitude, who had taken refuge in the city's underbelly. The stray dog, with unwavering loyalty, had been feeding him every day. This discovery, raw and heartbreaking, sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. People began to cry upon learning that a simple act of animal instinct was, in truth, a beacon of hope for a forgotten soul. The stray dog's daily journey was not merely about survival. It was a silent, moving testament to the enduring power of compassion in a world that often overlooks its most vulnerable. As the sun broke over the city that morning, the story of the stray dog and the man in the shadows promised to change lives. It was a story about connection, about unspoken kindness bridging the gap between two lonely hearts, and about how even the smallest gesture can bring light to the darkest places. In the pre-dawn gloom of a bustling city, a scruffy stray dog began its daily journey with unwavering determination. The urban landscape, still hushed by the early morning's chill, was transformed by soft streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. In a narrow alley between old brick buildings and neon-lit storefronts, the stray, thin, weathered yet resolute, trotted along the cracked sidewalks, its tail held high as if it knew a secret the rest of the world had yet to learn. Every day, without fail, the dog would approach a particular sewer grate tucked away in a shadowed corner. Locals rarely paid attention to this unassuming spot, which many assumed was nothing more than a forgotten drain amid the urban sprawl. Yet for the stray, this spot was sacred. With a measured pause, it would carefully drop a small morsel of food, a scrap of bread, a piece of cheese, or sometimes even a leftover hot dog, into the depths of the sewer. The ritual was performed with a quiet dignity that hinted at a deeper purpose beyond mere hunger. In the neighborhood, whispers began to circulate about this peculiar habit. Shopkeepers and residents exchanged puzzled glances, and some even joked about the dog's secret mission. However, as the days turned into weeks, the dog's routine continued unabated, and curiosity slowly grew into a burning need for answers. That's when Sarah, a determined local reporter with a reputation for uncovering heartfelt stories, decided to follow the trail. Sarah was known for her empathetic storytelling and her ability to see beauty in unexpected places. With her camera slung over her shoulder and notepad in hand, she set out early one morning, determined to discover the truth behind the stray dog's daily pilgrimage. As she trailed the dog from a respectful distance, she noticed details that others had overlooked. The way the animal's eyes softened as it reached the grate, the careful drop of the food that seemed more like an offering than a haphazard act. It was clear that the stray's behavior was not random. It was a deliberate, ritualistic act. Her investigation led her to question several locals, each providing fragments of information. An elderly man sitting by a corner deli mentioned that he'd seen the stray several times and assumed it was feeding another animal. A street vendor recalled that on some mornings, a thin figure could be seen lingering near that same sewer entrance, though no one knew who it was. Yet no one had pieced together the complete picture until Sarah's persistence began to pay off. One chilly morning, as Sarah patiently shadowed the stray's routine, she heard a soft, muffled sound coming from below the sewer grate. With her heart pounding, she knelt beside the opening and peered in. What she saw was both heartbreaking and startling. A frail, emaciated homeless man huddled in the dark, scarcely visible beneath the city's underbelly. The man, who appeared to have taken shelter in the forgotten spaces of the sewer system, was the silent recipient of the stray dog's daily offerings. Sarah's discovery sent shockwaves through her. This was not just a story about a stray dog with an odd habit. It was a story of quiet compassion in the midst of urban neglect. The dog's unwavering routine had become a lifeline for a vulnerable soul, a man whose existence had been all but erased by society's indifference. The realization that such a simple act of instinct could bridge the gap between the unseen and the forgotten moved Sarah deeply, and she knew her next step was to learn more about the man behind the darkness. Determined to uncover his story without intruding on his fragile privacy, Sarah began a careful investigation. She reached out to local shelters and community organizations, discovering that the man, known by some as Tommy, had been living on the fringes of society for years. His plight was a silent tragedy that few had noticed until now. Sarah arranged for a discreet interview, where Tommy, in broken but sincere words, recounted how he had fallen through the cracks of the system, losing his job, his home, and ultimately his hope, until the stray dog's daily visits rekindled a spark of survival. As Sarah pieced together the narrative, the initial challenge became clear. In a city teeming with life, it was all too easy to overlook those who lived in the shadows. The stray dog's actions were a poignant reminder that even the smallest acts of care could mean the difference between life and death. For Tommy, the food dropped by the compassionate canine was not just nourishment. It was a message that someone, somewhere, cared enough to notice his suffering. Sarah's story began to take shape as a tapestry of interwoven lives. A stray dog acting as an unlikely savior, a homeless man clinging to a sliver of hope, and a community that was only beginning to awaken to the silent struggles in its midst. In her notes and recorded interviews, Sarah captured the raw emotions, the gentle determination of the dog, and the quiet gratitude in Tommy's eyes. It was a story that promised to touch hearts and bring about tears of recognition and empathy. As the morning light grew stronger, Sarah stepped back to review her notes. The scene was set for a powerful revelation, a tale of compassion against the backdrop of urban indifference, where a stray dog's daily ritual shone a light on the darkest corners of the city and revealed a truth that would soon make people cry. And with that, she knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would change lives. In the wake of Sarah's startling discovery, the story began to ripple through the community like a soft, persistent echo. The early revelations had left many with mixed feelings, sorrow, hope, and a burning curiosity to understand the full scope of the stray dog's unusual ritual. For Tommy, the homeless man living in the dark, forgotten corners of the city, the gentle intervention of the loyal dog had sparked a glimmer of hope he hadn't felt in years. Yet, as more questions emerged, both Tommy and Sarah found themselves thrust into a complex web of human emotion and societal conflict. Sarah dedicated her days to building trust with Tommy, returning to the sewer entrance with her notepad and camera, but more importantly, with a compassionate ear. At first, Tommy was wary of her questions, his eyes clouded with a lifetime of neglect and silent resignation. Over time, however, his guarded manner softened. One chilly afternoon, as they sat together on a cold, battered bench away from prying eyes, Tommy began to share the story of his descent into isolation. He spoke in halting, broken sentences about how a series of misfortunes, a lost job, the collapse of his small apartment, and a deep personal grief had pushed him into the fringes of society. Amid his sorrow, he revealed that the stray dog had appeared one bitter night as if guided by fate, carrying a small scrap of food that provided both nourishment and an inexplicable sense of comfort. As Sarah recorded his account, she could see the transformation in Tommy's expression. His eyes, which had long held a vacant sadness, now flickered with a fragile hope. It was as if the stray dog's daily offerings had reminded him that someone, somewhere, cared enough to acknowledge his existence. Sarah's story was quickly evolving into much more than a simple investigation of a curious habit. It was becoming a narrative about the healing power of compassion in a harsh urban landscape. Meanwhile, the community's response began to surface in unexpected ways. Social media posts, initially sharing the video of the stray dog's routine, transformed into heartfelt tributes and calls for action. Neighbors, previously indifferent to the homeless individuals they passed daily, started discussing how they might help. Some local activists organized small food drives and clothing collections, inspired by the stray dog's silent message. Yet, not all reactions were positive. A few skeptical voices questioned the authenticity of the story, suggesting that the discovery was being exaggerated to spark pity or even to tarnish the city's image. This division deepened the conflict as the community struggled to reconcile their compassion with their ingrained prejudices. For Sarah, each interview and every captured moment became a piece of the larger puzzle. She returned to Tommy's side again and again, recording the gradual changes in his demeanor and the subtle shift in his attitude toward life. One particular moment stood out. On a drizzly morning, Tommy was seen cautiously approaching the stray dog as it made its way to the familiar sewer grate. Instead of the usual timid retreat, he extended a trembling hand toward the animal, a gesture laden with vulnerability and gratitude. Sarah's camera captured this silent communion, and the image soon resonated with thousands online. It was a quiet yet powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures forge the strongest bonds. Amid these tender moments, new challenges emerged. Local authorities, prompted by the growing media attention, began to question the conditions of the nearby sewer system and the safety of the area where Tommy had been found. City officials, caught between public pressure and bureaucratic inertia, debated whether to intervene in what many now recognized as a humanitarian crisis. Some argued that Tommy should be relocated to a shelter, while others believed that doing so would strip him of the dignity and autonomy he had fought so hard to preserve, even in his most desperate state. This bureaucratic tug-of-war added an additional layer of conflict, as community leaders and activists clashed over the best way to help someone who had become the living symbol of the stray dog's benevolence. In the midst of these discussions, Sarah encountered a local social worker named Rebecca, who had been visiting various parts of the city to assess the conditions of the homeless. With her calm and pragmatic approach, Rebecca offered a fresh perspective. Tommy's story isn't just about one man or one dog, she explained during one of their meetings. It's about how a single act of kindness can ripple through an entire community, challenging us to look beyond our preconceptions and help those in need. But we must be careful. Our intervention must respect his autonomy while providing real support. Rebecca's words resonated deeply with Sarah, and she began to see the unfolding narrative as an opportunity not only to tell a moving story, but also to galvanize practical change. As the investigation advanced, conflicts intensified both on a personal and community level. Tommy, who had started to trust Sarah and even Rebecca, began to worry about losing the small sanctuary that the stray dog had created for him, a routine that, while humble, provided him with a sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Sarah struggled with the ethical dilemmas of reporting on such a sensitive topic. Every time she captured a tearful moment or an act of kindness, she questioned how best to honor the privacy of those involved, without sacrificing the raw truth that made the story so powerful. The stray dog, ever the quiet guardian of hope, continued its daily ritual, unperturbed by the increasing human drama unfolding around it. In its silent consistency, it became a living emblem of the unyielding power of compassion. And as the community wrestled with questions of dignity, support, and the need for systemic change, the dog's simple act of dropping food into a sewer emerged as a poignant reminder that even in the darkest corners of urban life, there exists a spark of humanity, waiting to be kindled. In this evolving tapestry of human struggle and silent benevolence, Sarah found herself deeply moved, not only by Tommy's plight, but also by the collective awakening that was slowly reshaping her city. Each interaction, each conversation, carried the potential to transform sorrow into hope and indifference into action. And as the story of the stray dog and the man in the shadows continued to unfold, it was clear that this was only the beginning of a much larger narrative, one that would challenge the community to confront its own shortcomings and, ultimately, to rise above them in the name of compassion. As Sarah continued to follow the stray dog's daily ritual, a new, unexpected layer of mystery began to emerge. One overcast afternoon, while trailing the determined canine through the labyrinth of back alleys, Sarah noticed something unusual. After the dog dropped its carefully selected morsel into the sewer grate, it paused as if checking its surroundings, then trotted away with deliberate purpose. Intrigued, Sarah discreetly positioned her camera on a low tripod across the street, determined to capture every nuance of this routine. What she recorded over the next few days would soon add a twist to the narrative that no one had anticipated. Reviewing the footage late that night in her modest apartment, Sarah observed a recurring detail. The stray always carried a small scrap of food that bore a distinct mark, a tiny sticker with a faded emblem resembling a heart intertwined with a hand. It was a detail so subtle that it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not looking closely, yet its presence suggested that the food was not simply picked up at random from a trash bin. Instead, it appeared that the stray dog was gathering specific items from a particular source. Driven by this revelation, Sarah began to investigate the origin of the food scraps. Her inquiries led her to a once thriving neighborhood restaurant, now shuttered and nearly forgotten by the community. The restaurant, The Hearth, had once been renowned for its generous spirit. Its owners were known for donating unsold food to local charities. Although The Hearth had closed its doors years ago, remnants of its legacy still lingered. Sarah discovered that a small stockpile of branded food items and packages had been left behind in a storage room, a treasure trove of leftovers from the establishment's philanthropic days. It seemed that the stray dog, with an almost uncanny sense of purpose, had been picking up these items whenever its route took it near the abandoned restaurant. But the mystery deepened further when Sarah cross-referenced this discovery with interviews she'd previously conducted with Tommy, the homeless man who had been the unsuspecting recipient of the dog's daily offerings. In a rare, candid moment, Tommy had mentioned that before his life took a downward spiral, he had worked at The Hearth as a dishwasher. He recalled fond memories of the restaurant's warmth, not just in terms of physical comfort during the bitter winter, but also in the way the establishment treated its staff and the community. He'd spoken wistfully of the days when he'd share a smile with regular patrons and feel part of a larger, caring family. Piecing these details together, Sarah began to suspect that the stray dog's actions were far from random. Instead, they appeared to be a silent tribute to a legacy of compassion, a way of connecting the present hardships of a forgotten man with the benevolent past of The Hearth. The stray's daily ritual, once viewed as a quirk, now took on a profound significance. It wasn't merely about feeding Tommy, it was about preserving a memory, a lost tradition of kindness that had once lit up the neighborhood. Determined to confirm her hunch, Sarah arranged another discreet meeting with Tommy. In the quiet of a chilly afternoon at a small and nondescript park, she gently broached the subject. "Tommy, can you tell me more about your time at The Hearth?" she asked, her voice soft and empathetic. Tommy hesitated for a moment before his tired eyes softened with recollection. "That place, it was like a second home to me," he began slowly. "I didn't have much, but I had hope there. The owners, they treated everyone like family. Even when I had nothing to offer, they made sure I had a warm meal and a kind word. I still remember how a little sticker on the food boxes made me smile, like a secret sign of care." His voice trembled as he spoke, and it became clear that those small tokens of kindness had left an indelible mark on his heart. As Tommy recounted his memories, Sarah's theory solidified. The stray dog, perhaps once connected in some way to The Hearth or even to Tommy's past, was continuing a legacy of generosity that had been long abandoned by most. Each day, by collecting and delivering these specific food items, The dog was offering Tommy not only sustenance, but also a tangible link to his better days, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the city, the spirit of kindness endured. That evening, Sarah compiled her findings into a draft report that began to reshape the narrative. The stray dog's ritual was no longer an oddity. It was a carefully orchestrated act of remembrance and silent advocacy for a lost era of community care. The revelation stirred emotions among those who learned of it. People began to see Tommy's struggle and the stray dog's persistence in a new light. What had once been dismissed as a quirky habit now emerged as a poignant commentary on the power of compassion to bridge time and mend broken spirits. As the story grew, community members and local activists rallied together, inspired by the legacy of the hearth and the quiet heroism of a stray dog. The layers of the mystery had transformed the narrative from a simple act of feeding into an emblem of hope, a living bridge between past benevolence and present need. And as Sarah prepared to share her next report, she knew that this twist would not only bring tears to the eyes of viewers, but also inspire them to look more deeply into the quiet gestures of care that might be hidden in their own communities. In the days that followed Sarah's groundbreaking discovery, the community began to feel the ripple effects of the stray dog's remarkable routine. Tommy, the homeless man whose life had been unknowingly touched by the daily act of compassion, found himself at the heart of a slowly emerging narrative that wove together his past, the legacy of the hearth, and the silent generosity of a stray dog. At first, Tommy was overwhelmed by a mixture of disbelief and nostalgia. The realization that the food dropped by the stray wasn't merely random, but carried the emblem of a long-forgotten restaurant, stirred a turbulent wave of emotions. Sitting in a small corner of a local community center, where he had reluctantly agreed to share his story, Tommy's eyes glistened as he recalled his days working at the hearth. He described the warmth of that place, the kind smiles, the generous portions, and the little stickers that made every meal feel like a secret nod of care. Those stickers were like a promise, he murmured softly to a sympathetic listener. A promise that even on the coldest days, someone cared about us. His voice trembled as he recounted how those small tokens of kindness had given him hope during his darkest moments. Meanwhile, Sarah felt a profound responsibility not only as a storyteller, but as a mediator between Tommy's hidden past and the present moment of awakening. Every time she visited Tommy, she noticed subtle changes, the cautious glimmer in his eyes, the slight easing of his posture when he spoke of the hearth. Determined to honor his experience, Sarah began to compile more interviews and personal anecdotes from other former employees and community members who remembered the restaurant's legacy. She discovered that the hearth had been a beacon of hope in a time when many struggled to feel seen and valued. The narrative, as she pieced it together, was evolving into a powerful testament to how a small act, like a stray dog delivering food, could bridge the gap between forgotten memories and the present, rekindling a sense of community pride and resilience. As word of the story spread, local residents started to react in unexpected ways. Neighbors who had once hurried past the city streets with indifferent eyes now paused to discuss the plight of Tommy and the enduring legacy of the hearth. Community meetings were held, where activists, social workers, and concerned citizens debated how best to support individuals like Tommy. A local non-profit organization, inspired by the story, organized a series of initiatives aimed at providing both shelter and meaningful engagement for those who lived on society's margins. Volunteers began to frequent the areas near the old restaurant, collecting any remnants of its legacy and turning them into symbols of hope. Murals depicting warm meals and gentle hands soon appeared on walls, celebrating a time when kindness was the norm. Even the stray dog, unaware of the profound impact of its daily ritual, continued its routine with unwavering persistence. Its calm, methodical behavior became a silent metronome against the backdrop of the community's awakening. Every time the dog approached the sewer grate with its signature sticker-marked morsel, it evoked a quiet smile or a tearful recollection from someone who remembered better days. Sarah's camera captured these moments, an elderly woman pausing on her way to work, a group of teenagers discussing the story with a newfound respect for life's small wonders, and even a stern-faced city official whose hardened demeanor softened ever so slightly upon hearing Tommy's recollections. As the community adjusted to the unfolding truth, Tommy found himself grappling with a new sense of identity. For years, he had lived in the shadows, accepting charity as a begrudging necessity. Now he was slowly beginning to understand that his past held value, not as a relic of hardship, but as a vibrant part of a legacy that once warmed hearts and filled bellies. With Sarah's encouragement, he agreed to participate in a public discussion organized by the non-profit. Nervous yet determined, Tommy took the stage in front of a modest audience at a local community hall. In his simple, unpolished manner, he shared how the Hearth had been more than just a restaurant. It had been a family. His voice, initially shaky, grew stronger as he recounted the memories of shared meals and gentle gestures. And by the end of his talk, many in the audience were moved to tears. For Sarah, the experience was transformative. The delicate interplay between the stray dog's unwavering routine and Tommy's gradual reclamation of dignity underscored the profound impact of everyday compassion. Her reports evolved from mere documentation of an unusual act to a call for community action, a plea for society to remember that even the smallest gestures can have far-reaching consequences. In a quiet moment after one of these community gatherings, Sarah reflected on how far the story had come. The discovery of the sticker on the food had unlocked a chain of events that not only reconnected a lost man to his past, but also reminded an entire neighborhood of the importance of looking out for one another. It was a story that transcended individual hardships and touched upon the universal need for dignity, connection, and hope. As Tommy's story became interwoven with the legacy of the Hearth, and as community initiatives began to offer concrete support for those in need, a renewed spirit of empathy and responsibility spread throughout the city. People who had once turned a blind eye were now actively involved in creating a safer, more compassionate environment. And all the while, the stray dog continued its daily pilgrimage, an enduring, silent ambassador of kindness, reminding everyone that sometimes the smallest actions can light up the darkest corners of our lives. As the story of the stray dog and Tommy's rediscovered legacy continued to spread, new complications emerged that tested the fragile tapestry of compassion and community. What began as a quiet act of kindness soon attracted a swarm of attention, both benevolent and opportunistic, turning the narrative into a battleground of competing interests. One crisp morning, just as the city was shaking off the remnants of a cold night, Sarah received a tip from an anonymous source. The message warned that a planned redevelopment project was imminent in the area surrounding the old sewer grate, the very spot where the stray dog had made its daily pilgrimage. Rumors circulated that a powerful real estate developer, Mr. Kensington, had earmarked the neighborhood for upscale renovations. His intentions, though cloaked in the language of urban renewal, would undoubtedly lead to the displacement of the vulnerable, including Tommy, whose makeshift shelter near the sewer was now under threat. This news sent ripples of anxiety through the community. A redevelopment project could erase not only the physical space that had become a sanctuary, but also the symbolic heart of the story. Amid these unfolding challenges, a local politician named Councilwoman Ramirez, who had previously been a quiet observer of the neighborhood's struggles, stepped forward with a proposal to form a task force. The task force was to assess the impact of urban development on the underprivileged and to ensure that no one would be left behind. However, her plan quickly encountered resistance from influential business interests backing Mr. Kensington's project. Heated public meetings ensued, with activists and residents pleading for the preservation of community spaces and the protection of individuals like Tommy. Councilwoman Ramirez's impassioned speeches, broadcast on local news and social media, transformed the redevelopment debate into a moral issue should progress come at the expense of the city's most vulnerable souls. Meanwhile, a new subplot began to unravel when the stray dog, ever the quiet guardian, suffered a minor injury while crossing a busy street during one of its daily journeys. A car, driven by an inattentive motorist, grazed the animal's leg. Witnesses rushed to help, and soon the dog was taken to a local animal clinic. The news of the dog's injury spread rapidly, igniting an outpouring of sympathy from across the community. Fundraisers were organized, and social media campaigns bore heartfelt messages urging support for the injured stray. For many, the dog had become a symbol of unwavering kindness, a living reminder that small acts of compassion could have a profound impact. Yet, as the dog recovered, questions arose about its future. Would it continue its daily ritual? And could its presence still serve as a beacon of hope if it were permanently scarred by the accident? Amid the swirl of community activism and personal dramas, another layer of complexity emerged from Tommy's personal life. One day, as he sat on a worn bench recounting his memories to a small group of supportive locals, an unfamiliar face appeared. A man in his early 50s, with a weary yet determined expression, approached Tommy and introduced himself as Marcus, the estranged son of Tommy's long-lost sibling. Marcus explained that he had been searching for family after years of wandering and hardship, and his arrival was both an unexpected reunion and a new source of tension. For Tommy, the sudden appearance of a family member stirred up old wounds and unresolved grief. Though part of him longed for reconnection, he was also deeply suspicious of the sudden reappearance and uncertain motives. The family dynamics, already fragile from years of isolation, now faced the challenge of reconciliation and the possibility of a new support system, or, conversely, further disruption. Throughout these unfolding events, Sarah continued to document every twist and turn with a sense of urgency and empathy. She spent long hours recording community meetings, interviewing residents, and capturing raw footage of protests outside City Hall. Her camera not only recorded the dog's daily visits and Tommy's tender moments of recollection, but also the heated debates over redevelopment, the relief when the injured dog was nursed back to health, and the emotional reunion between Tommy and Marcus. Each scene was a vivid reminder that beneath the surface of urban life, a complex web of human stories was being woven, a web in which kindness, vulnerability, and resilience intersected in unexpected ways. As pressure mounted from multiple fronts, corporate redevelopment threatening to displace the homeless, community debates that polarized local opinions, and personal dramas reawakening buried family pain, the true essence of the stray dog's daily ritual took on even greater significance. The act of dropping food into the sewer was no longer an isolated quirk, but a potent symbol of a community's struggle to preserve its soul amid rapid change and growing indifference. It became a rallying cry for those who believed that progress should not come at the cost of compassion, and that even the smallest gesture could illuminate the darkest corners of society. In these turbulent times, the community's response was as varied as it was passionate. Some rallied behind Councilwoman Ramirez, organizing petitions and staging peaceful demonstrations to safeguard their neighborhood. Others, swayed by the allure of new opportunities, argued that redevelopment might bring long overdue economic benefits. And through it all, Sarah's evolving narrative captured the raw emotion and relentless determination of everyday people, striving to protect their dignity and the remnants of a lost era symbolized by the hearth. As the days turned into weeks, the challenges converged to create a critical juncture, a moment when the fate of the stray dog, Tommy's future, and the soul of the community hung in the balance. The stage was set for an epic struggle between those driven by profit and those fighting for compassion, with every heart in the city waiting to see which side would prevail. As the heated debates over redevelopment and the legacy of the hearth intensified, the community found itself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and unforeseen dilemmas. The stray dog's quiet, daily ritual had become a symbol not only of compassion, but also of the deep fissures within the neighborhood, between those who clung to cherished memories and those drawn to promises of economic progress. One chilly evening, Sarah returned to Tommy's usual bench in the park. The grey skies and cold drizzle set a somber tone as she met with Rebecca, the local social worker who had become a trusted confidant in the unfolding story. Over steaming cups of coffee in a small, dimly lit cafe, Rebecca expressed her inner turmoil. "Tommy's story has touched so many hearts," she said, her voice tinged with worry, "but it's also opened old wounds. Some of our community members see him as a symbol of the past they'd rather forget, a reminder of when things were simpler and perhaps better." Rebecca's words resonated with Sarah. In her interviews, She had noticed that not every resident embraced the resurgence of the hearth legacy. While some celebrated the revival of a once beautiful tradition, others, especially those who had been promised modern improvements, viewed it as a nostalgic distraction from the city's future. The tension was palpable during a recent community forum, where Councilwoman Ramirez passionately argued that redevelopment was essential for progress. "We cannot live in the past," she declared. "Our city must evolve, or we risk being left behind." Her words, however, clashed with heartfelt testimonials from longtime residents who remembered the warmth and generosity of the hearth. That very night, as rain pattered against the cafe windows, Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Tommy. He wrote simply, "They want to take me away from the place I call home. I feel so lost." The message, filled with raw emotion, prompted Sarah to arrange an impromptu meeting with Tommy on a quiet corner of the park. There, under the flickering glow of a street lamp, Tommy confessed in a trembling voice, "I've lived in these shadows for so long, and now I'm being told I must leave this place, even if it means losing the little bit of hope I've clung to." In a parallel thread of events, Marcus, the estranged son who had recently appeared, was struggling with his own inner conflicts. After his initial reunion with Tommy, he had spent several sleepless nights grappling with guilt and uncertainty. Marcus felt that his arrival, though potentially a source of new support, risked upsetting the fragile balance that had allowed his father to rediscover a sense of belonging. At a discreet meeting in a quiet community center room, Marcus confided to Daniel, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want to help, but I'm scared that my presence will only remind him of all the years he's been abandoned. I'm not sure if I'm ready to be part of this legacy of pain and hope." Daniel, who had become a mediator between old wounds and the promise of a new beginning, responded with gentle reassurance. "Marcus, sometimes the hardest parts of our past are the very things that help us build a brighter future. Your father needs you, even if it takes time for both of you to heal." As these personal dramas unfolded, Sarah found herself in the midst of an ethical crossroads. Every interview and every scene she captured carried immense emotional weight, but she also felt the burden of responsibility to protect the dignity of those involved. One afternoon, while editing her latest footage, Sarah paused at a clip of Tommy's tearful confession. She wrestled with the decision of how much to reveal to the public without exploiting the raw pain of a vulnerable man. "Am I being true to his story, or am I invading his privacy?" she pondered, knowing that every frame had the power to sway public opinion, for better or worse. Meanwhile, the redevelopment issue grew more urgent. Councilwoman Ramirez organized a public hearing, inviting both proponents of change and defenders of tradition. In the crowded town hall, voices clashed. A young entrepreneur argued passionately, "Modernity can't thrive if we're stuck preserving relics." Yet an elderly resident, tears welling in her eyes, countered, "Our history, our compassion, is what makes this community special." The atmosphere was charged with emotion, and in that heated exchange, the stray dog's simple act of kindness was invoked as a symbol of hope that transcended political agendas. "If a stray dog can remind us of our shared humanity," one speaker declared, "then surely we can find a way to blend progress with compassion." As the debate raged, Sarah continued her work behind the scenes, meticulously documenting the unfolding events. She interviewed residents, capturing a spectrum of sentiments, from cynical frustration to fervent idealism. In one poignant interview, a local teacher remarked, "This story has taught me that even in our toughest moments, a small act of kindness can change someone's world. It's a lesson I'll pass on to my students." Her words encapsulated the growing realization that Tommy's struggle, the stray dog's ritual, and the community's divided reactions were all part of a larger narrative about resilience and hope. Back in the park, as dusk turned to night, Tommy and Marcus shared a quiet moment. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words and tentative reconciliation. Tommy, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and newfound hope, reached out a trembling hand to Marcus. "I've been waiting for this moment," he murmured, "for us to come together again." In that fragile connection, the possibility of healing emerged, proof that even the deepest scars could mend through love and understanding. Throughout these turbulent days, The stray dog remained a steadfast, silent guardian of hope, its daily journey unaltered by the complex human drama that now enveloped it. Every act of dropping food into that hidden sewer grate resonated as a quiet protest against the indifference of a world too busy to notice the forgotten. And as the community grappled with its own inner conflicts, each person slowly began to recognize that the smallest gestures, a kind word, a shared meal, a stray dog's care, had the power to forge bonds that could heal even the most divided hearts. As the community's debate over redevelopment and the legacy of the hearth raged on, the tension surrounding the stray dog's daily ritual escalated into a maelstrom of uncertainty and hidden danger. In the weeks following the emotional community meetings and the stirring public protests, new elements of intrigue began to surface, sending ripples of fear and anticipation through every corner of the neighborhood. One overcast evening, as dusk turned the sky a deep shade of charcoal, Sarah received an anonymous message on her phone. The text, written in terse, capitalized words, warned, "Stop reporting, or else they are watching." The message chilled her to the core. Was this a threat from the shadowy network hinted at in earlier reports? Or was it from someone more local, perhaps connected to the redevelopment project, determined to silence the growing movement of compassion that the stray dog had come to symbolize? With trepidation, Sarah decided to keep the message to herself, while intensifying her efforts to document the unfolding events. Meanwhile, Tommy's daily life began to show alarming signs of change. Late one cold night, as he huddled near his usual spot by the sewer grate, he was startled by the sound of footsteps behind him. A hooded figure emerged from the shadows and pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand before disappearing into the darkness as swiftly as they had appeared. Trembling, Tommy unfolded the paper to reveal a warning written in neat, ominous handwriting. "Your place is not safe. Leave now, or suffer the consequences." The stark message compounded his existing fears about being displaced by the redevelopment project and the rising pressure from unseen forces. At the same time, during a heated community meeting at the local town hall, Councilwoman Ramirez introduced a new, unsettling development. She revealed that confidential sources within the city planning office had informed her of a covert meeting between representatives of Mr. Kensington's development team and a group of undisclosed financiers. The purpose of this meeting, she claimed, was not solely to discuss urban renewal, but also to neutralize any opposition from grassroots groups. Murmurs of shock and anger rippled through the audience. The suggestion that powerful interests were willing to use intimidation tactics to quash community resistance sent a surge of fear through those gathered. In the midst of these developments, Daniel and Marcus, who had begun to tentatively rebuild their relationship, found themselves caught in their own private storm of conflict. One chilly afternoon, Marcus received a phone call from an unknown number. The caller's voice was low and modulated, delivering a message that sent shivers down his spine. "Family ties can be a weakness. Do not get in the way of progress." The cryptic threat, though brief, left Marcus deeply unsettled and prompted him to warn Tommy about potential dangers lurking on the fringes of their fragile reunion. As these warnings mounted, Sarah's investigation took on an even darker hue. Determined to get to the bottom of the threats, she revisited her interview archives and cross-checked details with local law enforcement. In a discreet conversation with a sympathetic officer, she learned that there had been a series of break-ins at community centers and homeless shelters in the past month, incidents that were brushed off as petty vandalism, but in light of recent events, now appeared to be part of a coordinated campaign of intimidation. The officer confided that while no one had been harmed yet, the pattern was deeply concerning, and suggested that someone was systematically targeting vulnerable community members who dared to stand against the redevelopment. That same week, during one of her follow-up visits to Tommy's usual spot near the sewer, Sarah observed an unusual scene. The stray dog, its coat now marred by a fresh scar along its leg, was limping slightly as it made its way to the grate. Concerned, Sarah followed at a safe distance. The dog's unyielding determination to complete its ritual, despite the pain, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She managed to capture several close-up shots of the dog's injured paw, a silent testament to the mounting dangers that now surrounded its simple act of kindness. In an effort to protect the integrity of her story and the safety of her subjects, Sarah organized a small meeting with local community leaders and activists at a discreet location, a renovated community room in a local library. There, she shared the anonymous threats, the mysterious warning left for Tommy, and her latest footage of the injured stray. The room buzzed with a mix of outrage and determination. "This is no longer just about a stray dog feeding a homeless man," one community organizer declared. "It's about exposing a network that uses fear to silence voices of compassion." The meeting concluded with a unanimous decision to step up community vigilance and to prepare for possible escalation by forming an emergency support group that would monitor any further suspicious activities. That evening, as the city's lights flickered against the falling snow, Sarah prepared her latest report. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed out the events of the day, the warnings, the violent potential behind anonymous messages, and the visible evidence of harm to the stray dog. Every new detail added a layer of urgency to her narrative, one that now demanded not only empathy from her audience, but also action. With each keystroke, she hoped to ignite a broader conversation about the rights of the vulnerable and the dangers of unchecked power. Outside, the stray dog, undeterred by its recent injury, shuffled once more toward the sewer grate. Its persistence in the face of pain and intimidation had become a symbol of defiant hope, a silent protest against a system that sought to marginalize those already forgotten. And as the night deepened, it seemed that every shadow, every whispered threat, was converging toward one inevitable outcome. The community's resolve would soon be tested in a final, decisive struggle between compassion and coercion. In the wake of the unsettling warnings and the mounting tension, the community's resolve began to crystallize into concrete action. As dusk gave way to a chilly night, a group of determined locals, comprising community organizers, social workers, and even a few concerned city officials, gathered at a renovated community room in the local library. The atmosphere was electric with both fear and hope as they pooled their knowledge of the anonymous threats, the redevelopment plans, and the recent attacks against vulnerable citizens. At this meeting, Sarah presented her latest footage of the injured stray dog and shared the text messages received by Tommy. "Every detail," she stressed, "points to a deliberate attempt to silence this story and to scare away those who dare to uphold our community's legacy." Her words resonated with everyone present. The group agreed that the time for passive observation was over. They needed to organize and protect not only Tommy and the stray dog, but also the memory of the hearth and the spirit of compassion it represented. Rebecca, the empathetic social worker, proposed forming an emergency support network. "We need to monitor the situation closely," she said, her voice firm yet caring. "Let's create a schedule so that volunteers can keep an eye on key locations, the sewer grate, Tommy's usual spot, and any other areas that might become targets for intimidation." There was a unanimous nod of agreement, and plans were swiftly set in motion. In the following days, a small task force was established, complete with a hotline and a social media group dedicated to alerting the community of any further threats. Meanwhile, Sarah's investigation took another unexpected turn. As she sifted through additional documents from anonymous sources, she discovered a series of encrypted emails hinting at a shadow network behind the redevelopment. These messages mentioned names, dates, and even project code names like Urban Eclipse and Silent Renewal. One email in particular, partially decrypted on a rainy afternoon, suggested that certain influential figures were using redevelopment as a cover for broader gentrification schemes that would displace not only the homeless, but also long-standing community businesses and cultural landmarks. The revelation sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. The stakes were far higher than she had initially imagined. Determined to verify this new information, Sarah arranged a clandestine meeting with an informant known only as J.E. In a quiet corner of a nearly deserted diner late one evening, Jay, whose voice trembled with apprehension, revealed that several mid-level managers in the redevelopment project had ties to organized crime. "They use redevelopment as a means to launder money and push out communities," Jay confided in hushed tones. "If you expose this, You'll not only protect people like Tommy, but also dismantle a system built on exploitation. Sarah recorded every word, aware that this testimony could become the cornerstone of her next big report. At the same time, tensions continued to simmer in the personal lives of those most affected. Tommy, still reeling from the threats and the news that his precarious sanctuary might soon be obliterated by aggressive redevelopment, struggled to keep his composure. One grey morning, as he sat near the sewer grate wrapped in a threadbare blanket, he was joined by Marcus. The estranged relative, whose own fears had grown since receiving that ominous phone call, took Tommy's hand and said quietly, "I know you're scared, but we have to stand together. This place, it's the only home we have left. We must fight to keep it." Their tentative reconciliation, forged in shared vulnerability, marked the beginning of a slow but steady rebuilding of trust. In that simple, fragile moment, both men realized that unity was their greatest strength against forces determined to divide them. Over the next several days, community meetings became more frequent and the support network sprang into action. Volunteers patrolled the streets at night, using smartphones to document any suspicious activity near the sewer grate or around the abandoned The Hearth building. Local artists painted murals on drab walls, vivid depictions of the stray dog with its determined eyes, symbols of hope, and the faces of everyday heroes who refused to be silenced. These visual messages spread quickly on social media, galvanizing public sentiment and putting pressure on local officials to act. At one such meeting, Councilwoman Ramirez addressed the group with passionate urgency. "We are witnessing a transformation," she declared, "where every act of kindness is becoming a stand against exploitation. We must ensure that our city does not trade its soul for profit. Today we take a stand, not just for Tommy, not just for the stray dog, but for the very heart of our community." Her words sparked renewed determination among the crowd, and many vowed to continue monitoring the situation and to hold those in power accountable. Meanwhile, Sarah compiled all her new findings, the encrypted emails, Jay's testimony, and countless community interviews, into a comprehensive report that began to expose the underbelly of the redevelopment scheme. Her story, now rich with layers of intrigue and human resilience, promised to challenge the official narrative and to shine a light on the corruption lurking beneath glossy promises of urban renewal. As night fell once again and the cold winds swept through the city, the community's emergency network continued its vigilant watch. In the background, the stray dog, its injured paw bandaged and its spirit undimmed, continued its daily ritual at the sewer grate. Each step it took resonated as a quiet act of defiance against the forces of greed and indifference. In the soft glow of streetlights, the dog's silhouette became a symbol of unyielding hope, a living reminder that even the smallest gestures could unite a community and spark a revolution of compassion. Under a slate-gray sky that mirrored the community's deepening anxiety, the tension that had been steadily mounting over the redevelopment project finally erupted into a confrontation that would redefine the neighborhood's future. It was a bitterly cold morning when the City Council announced a special emergency meeting at the Town Hall, a repurposed community center now buzzing with a mix of hope and foreboding. Rumors of covert meetings and intimidation tactics had spread like wildfire, and this gathering promised to be the decisive battleground where the forces of progress and preservation would clash. Inside the crowded town hall, a palpable energy filled the air. Local residents, community organizers, and activists had gathered in droves, their faces set in determined lines as they prepared to stand up against what they saw as an existential threat. Councilwoman Ramirez took the stage first, her voice ringing out clearly amid the murmurs of the crowd. "Our community is at a crossroads," she declared. "We cannot allow redevelopment schemes that erase our heritage, displace our neighbors, and trample over the compassion that has always defined us." Her speech, filled with passion and urgency, was met with rapturous applause and the resounding chants of supporters. Amid the throng, Tommy sat in the front row, his tired eyes reflecting both fear and a flicker of hope. For years, he had lived in the shadows, relying on the stray dog's daily ritual to remind him that someone cared. Today, he was no longer an invisible bystander. He was a symbol of the community's fight for dignity. Next to him, Marcus, The estranged relative who had come to help rebuild their fractured bond held Tommy's hand. Their quiet solidarity underscored the personal stakes at play. Outside the town hall, the streets teemed with demonstrators. Banners bearing slogans like "Heritage over high-rises" and "Keep our community warm" were waved with fervor. The stray dog, now bandaged but undeterred by its recent injury, continued its daily pilgrimage toward the sewer grate, even as the protests roiled around it. Its persistent journey had become a rallying symbol, a living reminder of the simple yet profound act of kindness that had sparked this entire movement. Inside the council chamber, tension escalated as Mr. Kensington's representative, a sharply dressed man with an unnerving calm, took the podium. His tone was measured and icy as he outlined the economic benefits of the redevelopment project. "Our vision for urban renewal will bring investment, modern infrastructure, and job opportunities to this area," he asserted. "While some sentimentalities may cloud judgment, progress must be our guiding star." His words, intended to cut through emotion with cold logic, only fueled the collective ire of the audience. A heated debate broke out. Voices rose in protest as one resident shouted, "Your so-called progress is built on the backs of people like Tommy." Another countered, "We deserve a future that honors our past without sacrificing our soul to corporate greed." The chamber's atmosphere became electric with conflicting passions. Amid the clamor, Councilwoman Ramirez maintained her composure and continued, "We are here not only to preserve a piece of history, but to protect the lives and dignity of those who have been forgotten. This meeting is our opportunity to say that compassion cannot be bulldozed by profit." As the meeting reached its fevered peak, an unexpected moment of clarity unfolded. Officer Ramirez, one of the younger, empathetic officers who had been monitoring the situation, stepped forward from the back of the room. In a calm yet resolute tone, he announced, "I have reviewed additional evidence that indicates our redevelopment plans are entangled with coercive practices and even hints of criminal activity. The information suggests that there have been deliberate attempts to intimidate residents and silence dissent." His declaration brought a stunned silence to the chamber, punctuated only by the murmurs of awe and anger from the crowd. The revelation struck a decisive chord. Mr. Kensington's representative faltered, his carefully rehearsed arguments now undermined by the officer's testimony. Councilwoman Ramirez seized the moment, declaring, "Let this be known. If our community is to move forward, it must be on our terms, built on transparency, respect, and the unwavering belief that no one should be forced out of their home by fear or greed." The meeting ended with a resounding vote in favor of a temporary injunction to halt the redevelopment until a thorough, independent investigation could be completed. Outside, the triumphant shouts of the demonstrators reverberated through the cold air as community members embraced one another. In that charged moment, Tommy stepped forward, his voice cracking with raw emotion as he addressed the gathered crowd. "I never thought anyone would care about a homeless man like me," he said. "But today I feel seen, I feel heard. This dog, this simple act of kindness, it reminded me that I still matter. And together, we can change this city." As his words hung in the air, the stray dog appeared once again at its usual spot by the sewer grate, its silhouette framed by the flickering glow of streetlights. Its determined stride, despite a wounded paw, became a powerful symbol of resilience, a silent testament that even the smallest acts of care could spark monumental change. In the days that followed, the community's victory at the town hall ignited a wave of renewed activism. Social media exploded with messages of hope and solidarity, and local news outlets picked up the story of how one stray dog had inspired an entire neighborhood to fight for its future. Councilwoman Ramirez and the newly formed Emergency Support Network continued to press for accountability, determined to expose any remnants of corruption behind the redevelopment scheme. Amid this unfolding drama, Sarah's reporting took on an even greater urgency. Her camera captured the raw emotions of the protest, the tearful gratitude of Tommy and Marcus, and the unwavering determination in the eyes of every person who had gathered to protect their community. With each interview and every broadcast, the message was clear. When compassion unites a community, even the darkest forces of greed and exploitation can be overcome. In that critical turning point, when voices rose as one against injustice, and the stray dog's quiet act of feeding became a symbol of collective hope, the future of the neighborhood was irrevocably transformed. The struggle had reached its climax, and every heart present knew that the battle for dignity, heritage, and compassion was just beginning. In the days following the explosive town hall meeting, the tension in the neighborhood reached a point where confrontation became inevitable. The community was now divided into two distinct camps, one determined to resist the redevelopment at all costs, and another ready to embrace the promise of economic progress. Every meeting, every heated discussion, and every whispered conversation carried the weight of a decision that would irrevocably shape the future of the area. One chilly evening, as a light rain began to fall over the city, a special gathering was called by Councilwoman Ramirez at the local community center. The room, filled with a mixture of weary residents, passionate activists, and a few sympathetic local officials, was charged with urgency. Councilwoman Ramirez, whose voice had grown stronger since the town hall showdown, took the podium once again. "Tonight we must decide. Do we allow corporate interests to bulldoze our heritage, or do we stand together to protect what makes our community unique?" she demanded, her eyes scanning the room as murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Amid the heated debate, a representative from Mr. Kensington's redevelopment team, Mr. Langford, was present to answer questions. His crisp suit and cool demeanor seemed out of place among the raw emotion of the meeting. "Our project is designed to bring prosperity," he stated calmly, "but we are open to dialogue. We are not here to erase the past. We want to build a future that benefits everyone." His words, however, only fueled skepticism. An elderly resident stood up and retorted, "How can you claim to care about us when you plan to displace the very people who have nurtured this community for generations?" As voices clashed, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Sarah, now recognized as a trusted reporter with deep insight into the unfolding events, was invited to speak as a community liaison. With a steady yet impassioned tone, she addressed both sides. "This isn't merely about bricks and mortar. It's about human dignity. The stray dog's daily act of kindness, the legacy of the hearth, and the life of Tommy, all of these are intertwined with the soul of our neighborhood. We must find a way to honor our past while cautiously embracing the future." Her plea resonated with many, but it also intensified the pressure on everyone present. Outside the community center, demonstrations had intensified. Groups of protesters clashed with hired security near the old The Hearth site, and social media was ablaze with images and videos of passionate speeches and confrontations. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of hope, anger, and fear. Fear that the redevelopment would destroy a fragile network of support for the most vulnerable, and hope that together, the community could forge a path that preserved its history and compassion. In a parallel scene, Tommy and Marcus found themselves at a crossroads. Having recently reconciled, they now faced the decision of whether to accept relocation assistance offered by a local shelter, a plan that, while promising more stable living conditions, would mean leaving behind the familiar area where the stray dog had provided sustenance and hope. One cold morning, as they sat together on a battered bench near the sewer grate, Marcus softly urged, "Dad, maybe it's time to consider the shelter. It could offer you safety and warmth, something we've been missing." Tommy's eyes filled with tears as he replied, "But this place, this spot, it's not just a location. It's where I felt remembered, where that dog showed me that someone cared. How can I just leave that behind?" Their conversation underscored the personal cost of the impending changes, a cost that was both emotional and existential. At the community center later that evening, a breakthrough moment unfolded when Councilwoman Ramirez proposed a compromise. "What if we work with both sides?" she suggested, her voice resolute. "We can push for a redevelopment plan that incorporates affordable housing and community spaces. We can ensure that the legacy of the hearth is preserved as a cultural center, while also allowing for necessary economic progress." Her proposal was met with cautious optimism. The room fell into a thoughtful silence as residents weighed the possibility of progress that did not come at the expense of compassion. Mr. Langford, representing the redevelopment interests, leaned forward and offered, We are willing to consider revisions that meet community needs. Let us work together to draft a plan that safeguards the vulnerable while modernizing the area." His offer, though measured, was a significant concession. It signaled that even powerful interests might be swayed by a united community voice. In that pivotal moment, the room became a battleground of ideas, with heated debates giving way to tentative agreements. Community organizers, social workers, and local officials collaborated to draft a preliminary framework that promised to address both the economic ambitions of Mr. Kensington's team and the cultural and social needs of the neighborhood. The plan would include the preservation of the old The Hearth building as a heritage site, the creation of affordable housing units, and a dedicated fund to support the homeless and marginalized residents like Tommy. As the meeting drew to a close, the collective decision was clear. While challenges remained, the community was determined to take control of its future. They resolved to hold further public consultations, engage independent experts to review the redevelopment proposals, and set up a monitoring committee to ensure that the rights of the most vulnerable were protected. In that charged atmosphere, as passionate voices mingled with cautious hope, Sarah recorded every word and every tear shed that night. Her report would soon reveal not just a story of conflict, but one of unity. A story where individuals from all walks of life chose to come together in the face of powerful opposition. With the promise of a new, inclusive redevelopment plan on the horizon, the community left the meeting room with a renewed sense of purpose. The decisions made that night would shape not only the physical landscape, but also the future of human dignity and compassion in their city. Under a sky heavy with swirling clouds and a biting wind that seemed to echo the community's collective anxiety, the final days before the climactic showdown arrived with an almost unbearable intensity. The redevelopment dispute had reached a boiling point, and every heart in the neighborhood pounded with a mix of dread and fierce determination. The once quiet streets were now charged with the energy of protests, whispered threats, and resolute declarations that change was imminent. That cold morning, as rain began to streak the windows of the community center, Councilwoman Ramirez gathered the leaders of the Emergency Support Network for one last urgent meeting. The room, filled with activists, volunteers, social workers, and even a few sympathetic officials, was a swirl of whispered plans and determined stares. Ramirez's voice, steady but edged with urgency, broke the tense silence. "This is it. We are at the cusp of a decision that will either protect our heritage or let it vanish forever. We must be ready for anything. Today, our actions will determine the fate of our community." At the same time, Sarah was huddled in a small, dimly lit office at the local newspaper, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she pieced together the latest developments. New footage from hidden cameras showed a series of men in dark suits, clearly connected to Mr. Kensington's network, surveying key locations around the old The Hearth site. In one clip, a shadowed figure was seen handing a sealed envelope to a hooded individual near Tommy's usual spot by the sewer. Sarah's pulse raced as she realized that the threats were becoming more coordinated and, perhaps, more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Elsewhere, Tommy's world was crumbling under the weight of mounting pressure. For years, the stray dog's daily offering had been his lifeline, a small, consistent reminder that he was not entirely forgotten. But now, with anonymous warnings and the looming threat of eviction, his once familiar refuge felt perilously transient. One frigid evening, as Tommy sat shivering on a worn-out bench beneath a flickering street lamp, he clutched a tattered blanket tightly around him. His eyes, red-rimmed and desperate, scanned the darkened street for any sign of the shadowy figures that had begun to haunt his nights. "I'm scared," he muttered, voice barely audible over the howling wind. "What if this is the end of everything I've known?" Marcus, who had grown closer to his father in recent weeks, joined him on that cold bench. The two sat in a heavy silence, each lost in a torrent of conflicting emotions. Finally, Marcus reached out and squeezed his father's hand. "Dad, we have to stand together," he whispered, his tone both pleading and resolute. "I know it's hard, but we can't let them take this away from us. This place, this routine, this dog, it's given you hope when nothing else did. We have to fight for that." Back at the community center, the atmosphere reached a fever pitch. During a breakout session, A local activist named Jamal stood up, his voice shaking with both anger and determination. "We've been pushed around for too long," he declared, his words reverberating in the hushed room. "These corporate interests and their thugs think they can intimidate us, silence us, and erase our history. But we are more than numbers on a spreadsheet. We are a community that cares. Every time that dog drops food into that sewer, it's a reminder that someone still cares about those left behind. We won't let that symbol be tarnished by greed." As the meeting progressed, Councilwoman Ramirez outlined a final strategy: a coordinated night watch around the key spots, an immediate hotline for any further threats, and a promise to mobilize legal support to contest any eviction orders. Volunteers were assigned shifts, and flyers were distributed urging everyone to remain vigilant. The collective energy was palpable, a mix of resolve and raw emotion, as if every person present had personally staked their future on the outcome of the coming days. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her relentless investigation. Late into the night, she met with her confidential informant, Jay, in a secluded corner of a quiet diner. Over cups of steaming coffee, Jay revealed the most chilling piece yet. They plan to use force if necessary. The redevelopment isn't just about money. It's about erasing the past and controlling the future. I've seen plans for security teams that aren't there to protect the community, but to scare it into submission. Sarah's hands trembled as she recorded the details, fully aware that her next report could spark public outrage and possibly alter the course of the impending conflict. As midnight approached, the community's emergency network activated its plan. On the streets, small groups of volunteers patrolled the area near the sewer grate and the abandoned The Hearth building. Flashlights flickered in the darkness as they documented every suspicious activity, every whispered conversation, and every looming shadow. Phones buzzed with updates, and the local social media channels exploded with calls to action. The stray dog, despite its injured paw and the dangers around it, made its nightly journey to the sewer, its determined pace a living emblem of unyielding hope. In the final moments of that long, tense night, as the rain began to subside and a cold mist settled over the city, the stakes were clear. The community was poised on the edge of a decisive battle, a battle between the forces of compassion and those of corporate and criminal greed. The weight of every threat, every whispered warning, every act of solidarity had converged into this singular, electrifying moment. The future of Tommy, the memory of The Hearth, and the very soul of the neighborhood now rested on a knife's edge. Every heart, every voice in the community, and every determined step of that stray dog echoed a promise that no matter how dark the night, even the smallest act of kindness could ignite a beacon of hope, ready to challenge the forces that sought to snuff it out. And as dawn slowly broke on the horizon, it was clear that the stage had been set for an inevitable, dramatic confrontation, a final stand that would determine whether compassion would ultimately prevail. The tension that had been simmering for weeks finally exploded on a frigid winter night. In the final hours before a decisive council vote on the redevelopment plan, the entire community gathered in the town hall, a repurposed building now transformed into a fortress of shared determination. The air was electric with anticipation and fear. Every face in the crowded chamber reflected a singular hope: to preserve the heritage and compassion that the stray dog's quiet act had come to symbolize. Councilwoman Ramirez, standing at the podium with steely resolve, opened the meeting. "Tonight," she announced, her voice unwavering despite the roaring wind outside, "we decide the fate of our community. We stand at the crossroads of progress and preservation, of corporate greed and genuine compassion. We will not allow our history, our soul to be bulldozed in the name of profit." Her words resonated with every person present, amplifying the urgency of the moment. At that very instant, Sarah's latest report, now backed by irrefutable evidence gathered from hidden cameras and anonymous informants, was being broadcast live on local channels and social media. Footage showed men in dark suits exchanging envelopes, security forces patrolling near Tommy's usual spot, and even the stray dog limping resolutely toward its familiar sewer grate despite a freshly bandaged paw. The visuals struck a deep chord with the viewers. They were not just witnessing an urban dispute, but the unfolding of a David versus Goliath battle. As the council members debated heatedly, an unexpected interruption silenced the room. The large glass doors of the town hall burst open, and Officer Ramirez, a young but determined member of the police force known for his empathy, stepped forward with a stack of official documents in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, his voice ringing with authority, "I have just received confirmation from higher authorities that the redevelopment project is under criminal investigation. There is evidence linking Mr. Kensington's team to coercive tactics and even extortion. Effective immediately, all plans that jeopardize the safety and dignity of our community are on hold." A murmur of disbelief and relief spread throughout the hall. For a moment, the oppressive weight of uncertainty lifted, replaced by an electrifying surge of hope. But then, from the back of the room, Mr. Langford, representative of the redevelopment interests, rose to his feet, his eyes flashing with barely concealed anger. "This is nothing but a political stunt," he shouted. "You're letting emotions override progress." His challenge was met by a chorus of counter-arguments from the community, voices raised in unison. "We won't be silenced. We deserve to be heard." At that critical juncture, Tommy, who had been seated quietly near the front, felt a surge of resolve. No longer the silent, desperate man lurking in the shadows, he stood up and, with trembling determination, took the microphone. "I've lived on the fringes for too long, forgotten by society," he began, his voice raw and earnest. "Every day, that stray dog came and dropped food into that sewer. I thought it was just a quirk, a random act. But I've learned it was a message of hope. It reminded me that someone cared, even when I had nothing to offer. I'm not just fighting for myself, I'm fighting for every soul that has been ignored." His words, simple yet profoundly moving, brought tears to many eyes in the room. In that moment, the tide began to turn decisively. The council, now galvanized by the emotional testimony and the mounting evidence of criminal exploitation, unanimously voted to call off the redevelopment project until an independent review could be completed. The decision was met with thunderous applause and heartfelt cheers from the assembled community. Outside the town hall, hundreds of residents poured into the streets, waving banners that read, "Heritage over high-rises" and "Keep our community warm," their chants echoing against the cold night air. Yet, the climax was not solely about the council's decision. It was also defined by the enduring spirit of the stray dog, whose daily act of kindness had sparked this revolution. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah captured a final, unforgettable scene. The stray dog, its paw still wrapped in a makeshift bandage, slowly approaching the sewer grate in the early hours of dawn. Its silhouette, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, became a living symbol of resilience, a testament to the idea that even the smallest acts of compassion can ignite monumental change. Officer Ramirez, standing beside Councilwoman Ramirez, reiterated in a firm, compassionate tone, "Tonight, we've shown that when a community comes together, even the darkest forces can be overcome. This is a victory for all of us." His words were broadcast live, resonating with viewers far beyond the confines of the town hall. As dawn broke over the city, the air was filled with a renewed sense of unity and possibility. The once divided community was now bound by a shared mission: to protect their heritage, to nurture the vulnerable, and to ensure that compassion remained the cornerstone of their future. The stray dog's persistent journey, simple yet profound, had not only changed Tommy's life, but had also sparked a movement that would forever alter the landscape of the city. In that climactic moment, as the first light of day illuminated tear-streaked faces and hopeful smiles, it was clear that the battle for dignity, heritage, and compassion had reached a turning point. The forces of greed and exploitation had been held at bay, and a community united in its resolve had triumphed. The stage was now set for a new era, one where every act of kindness, no matter how small, would be celebrated as a beacon of hope in an often cold and indifferent world. As the first light of dawn bathed the city in soft hues of hope, the community began to settle into a new rhythm, a rhythm that had been forged through struggle, tears, and ultimately, a triumph of compassion over greed. In the weeks following the pivotal council meeting, a palpable shift transformed the neighborhood. The redevelopment project, once poised to erase decades of shared history, was now paused for an independent review. This victory was not just a bureaucratic win. It was a renewal of community spirit, a celebration of the values that had been quietly championed by a stray dog and a forgotten man. Tommy, the homeless man who had once faded into the shadows, now found himself at the center of a communal embrace. No longer did he linger in isolation near the sewer grate. Instead, he became a symbol of resilience and hope. With the support of local activists and new government programs inspired by the community's stand, Tommy began receiving consistent care and shelter. His daily struggles, once marked by cold despair, gradually gave way to moments of quiet dignity. The memory of the stray dog's simple yet relentless act of kindness continued to remind him that he was seen and valued. In his eyes, the community saw not only a man once forgotten, but a living testament to the power of human connection. Marcus, who had re-entered Tommy's life with a mix of trepidation and determination, found solace in rebuilding a relationship that had long been fractured by time and pain. Their tentative reconciliation evolved into a bond marked by mutual support, with Marcus stepping up to help Tommy navigate a world that had once treated him harshly. Together, they began to share their story at community centers and local gatherings, stories that highlighted the transformative power of small acts of kindness. Their journey, filled with both struggle and tender moments, inspired others to reach out and support those living on society's margins. For Sarah, the dedicated journalist who had chronicled every twist and turn of this unfolding narrative, the story evolved into more than just a report. It became a mission. Her investigative work, which had once started with curiosity over a stray dog's peculiar habit, had grown into an expansive tapestry of urban resilience, hidden histories, and the fight for dignity. Sarah's reports, broadcast on local news and amplified across social media, not only informed the public but also ignited a movement. Through her lens, viewers saw the raw emotions of protest, the tearful testimonies of the vulnerable, and the enduring determination of a community united in its stand against injustice. Her work was a clarion call, urging citizens to look beyond the surface and to engage with the issues that affected their own lives and neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Councilwoman Ramirez and the Emergency Support Network, bolstered by the collective outcry and overwhelming public support, set in motion plans to establish permanent safeguards for the community. They began drafting proposals to preserve key historical sites, including the hearth, ensuring that these symbols of past generosity would remain intact as community centers and cultural hubs. The new redevelopment strategy, one that balanced economic progress with the preservation of local heritage, became a model for other cities grappling with similar challenges. Through tireless meetings, public consultations, and a relentless pursuit of transparency, the community began to reclaim its narrative, asserting that progress need not come at the expense of its soul. Outside, the stray dog continued its daily pilgrimage, undeterred by its past injuries. Its determined journey to the sewer grate had become a ritualistic emblem of hope, an enduring reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can spark monumental change. Passers-by, once indifferent to its presence, now paused to watch, their hearts touched by the sight of this resilient creature. The dog's simple act, dropping a piece of food into a dark opening, had catalyzed a cascade of events that ultimately united an entire community. In the aftermath of these transformative events, the community began to look to the future with renewed optimism. New programs were set up to provide affordable housing, job training, and health services to the most vulnerable residents. Local schools incorporated lessons on civic engagement and compassion, inspired by the story that had touched so many. The narrative of the stray dog and Tommy had transcended its humble beginnings to become a beacon of what could be achieved when a community refused to turn a blind eye to the suffering around it. As our story draws to a close, we are reminded that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the potential to ignite change. The journey of the stray dog, the resilience of Tommy, and the determination of a community united in hope teach us that even in the coldest, darkest moments, warmth can be found through compassion and solidarity. Before you go, we invite you to join this movement of hope and kindness. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, share your thoughts in the comments below, and spread the message that every life matters. Watch our next video to see how communities like these continue to fight for dignity and inspire change. Remember, every small act of kindness can make the world a warmer place, one heart at a time. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay kind, stay compassionate, and keep the warmth alive.